Crossing You.
He starred in Showtime's Homeland, the film Blood Diamond, as well as the TV series Supergirl. He says being a black actor here in the States is much better than working as an actor in the UK. But David Harewood admits if he suffered mental illness here in this country, he'd likely end up dead.
Absolutely. I'd have been shot. I had 7 policemen sitting on top of me for 2 hours when I was having my breakdown. You only have to look on YouTube, tap in black mental health in the States, and you see guys being shot, tasered, pepper sprayed, dragged in police cars, thrown in jail. It's brutal.
I'm Eddie Robinson, and stay tuned for a very candid interview with acclaimed actor David Harewood, as this episode serves as the first of a 2-part series focusing on mental health and its impact on the black community and other communities of color. Oh yeah, I feel you. We hear you. I see you. You're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson. David Harewood, a British actor, director, and author with a remarkable career that's had him on film shoots all over the world, from Los Angeles to parts of Canada, South Africa, even Morocco. More than likely, you've seen him in the CW television series Supergirl.
And who are you?
I'm the Martian Manhunter!
Showtime's Homeland.
It was classified material, Saul, improperly removed from this office, assembled by a crazy woman into a crazy collage, and I don't even want to know about your involvement in it.
And the film I remember seeing him for the first time back in 2006, the movie Blood Diamond.
Young man, you must understand. The government wants you to vote, okay? They don't tell you, say, the future is in your hands. We not the future. So we take your hands. No more hands, no more voting.
Where he played an incredible villain by the name of Captain Poison. But something happened to David in his 20s. He struggled severely with mental illness and had a psychotic breakdown at age 23. Throughout his life, he's been open and honest about what he experienced, and he's even shared much of how it all went down in a BBC documentary released about 3 years ago entitled Psychosis in Me, where he pieces together how it all happened.
When we talk about psychosis, there's still that stigma. Even I say I had a breakdown. Someone who was to say somebody's psychotic, you would instantly think that they're crazy, dangerous, mad, sort of raving, loony. You know, that's what we think when we talk about psychosis.
The places, the locations where things went down, the friends who witnessed his mental state, and even met with folks who also experienced psychotic episodes and mental breakdowns. And now, some 30 years later, he's able to finally process what all he had gone through in hopes of helping someone else from spinning completely out of control. He's recently released a new book called Maybe I Don't Belong Here, a memoir of race, identity, breakdown, and recovery. He's here to talk to us about each of those factors and the lessons he's learned for himself and the importance of taking mental health seriously, especially if you're black. From his home in London, we're so fortunate and grateful to have with us virtually critically acclaimed actor and director, David Harewood. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and to be a special guest on ICU with Eddie Robinson.
Oh, thank you for asking me. Looking forward to this little discussion, seeing what you put my way.
Yes, and we're putting it your way because, look, you were born in the year 1965 in Birmingham, England, not Birmingham, Alabama. Here in the States, civil rights activists like my grandparents from Mississippi, they used to call Birmingham Bombingham, Alabama, because of how intense the violence was out there back in the 60s. But David, tell us about your upbringing in England. What was it like out there in Birmingham? What was it like being black and British?
Well, where to begin? I mean, we don't have the sheer weight of numbers of the black community in the States. My parents were first-generation immigrants from the Caribbean. And, you know, historically, people from the Caribbean had always looked up to England. England was the mother country. And so, after the Second World War, thousands flocked to England to help rebuild the mother country, thinking that the streets were paved with gold and they were going to be sort of welcomed with open arms. And when they got here, found that things were very, very different, and were met with a kind of wall of resistance and racism, which I think shocked a lot of people. And I think for a lot of my parents' generation, that experience was extremely damaging, because they had been brought up to believe something completely different. So I would often ask my own father, what was it like when you got here? And he would never talk about it. He would never speak about it. He would never go into details. When I had my breakdown, I think I understood that, because it's trauma. Dealing with that level of racism, that level of surprise racism, particularly when you've been brought up to believe that it, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but that it isn't quite as brutal. And I think in America, racism is a fact of life. From the minute you're born, your grandmother will talk about it, your grandfather will talk about it, you'll go to school learning about it. Being black in America, you can't be objective about it. The facts of racism. It's in your face, and it's much more overt. Whereas in England, it's very different. It's completely the opposite. It's much more psychological. So you sort of grow. So when I was growing up, I was assimilating, and people would say, "Oh, there's no such thing as racism. So everything's fine. You're fine. Everybody's fine." And you've got to grow up as a young boy thinking that, you're a little English boy. And then, as I write in my book, at 7 years old, I was playing outside my house, and an elderly white gentleman walked up to me and said, "Get the out of my country. Get the out of my country, you little black bastard." And that was the first moment in my young brain that I suddenly realized, oh, I'm not, some people don't think this is my country. And that's the title of my book, is Maybe I Don't Belong Here. That's why I wrote it that way. Because from that moment on, as a young black boy, you're sort of growing up with the kind of duality in your head. You're black, but you're not British, English. And that duality can lead to a sort of schism in your development, in your psyche. And I think for me, there was a constant battle then of sort of engaging with a black identity, not understanding what a black identity was, because unlike America, we didn't have blacks, a black culture as such. We had a West Indian culture, but most of the black heroes are American. Most of the black stars are American. We were constantly looking to America for our sort of black iconography, but so we had nothing closer to home. So obviously you're not American, so you're sort of looking to that as a sort of lead. But constantly, when you're in England, you're still sort of assimilating. It's just just blend in. Just blend in. Just kind of get on with life. Don't rock the boat. Just get on with things. And I think I did that to. I think that's to my detriment. I mean, but I think it's very easy as a black person to. I would say, because you have a choice. Either you cut your hair nice and you assimilate and you play the game, and you go to school, you learn, you do all the education, you play the game, you just get on with it, and you don't sort of overly emphasize a sort of black identity. And I think I was perhaps guilty of that, and went to discovered acting. And then went to drama school, and at drama school I'm learning Shakespeare and doing all these plays and doing all these European literature, and I'm loving all that. That was all wonderful. But again, at school nobody mentioned my colour. So I was sort of, in many ways, I didn't think it was important. I didn't think my colour, my culture was important. And when I came out of drama school, having in this protective bubble of freedom and playing King Lear, playing Hamlet, playing Romeo, doing all these wonderful roles, and nobody saying anything about that. When I came out of drama school, the real world said to me, "You're black." And that was a great psychic shock and reminder.
Wow.
And that is when the newspapers would say everything was black actor David Harewood, the black actor David Harewood, who is black. And so everything was reading about me, and suddenly that was the first time I was dealing with myself as my blackness as a political reality.
Sure.
So interviewers would say, "So you're playing Romeo. Shakespeare didn't write Romeo as a black character. Well, how do you feel playing Romeo and being black?" So I'm suddenly dealing with all this, and all these questions that I'd never dealt with.
Sure.
And that's what it began to spin me out, because I think that harsh reality of how the world saw me and how I saw myself clashed.
Sure.
And that started to undermine my mental health. And suddenly I was limited in what I could do. I was only going for black roles, and whereas at drama school I was going for everything. I was playing all sorts of leading roles, and suddenly, no, you're only going for this little black role.
Interesting.
And suddenly you know you're not going to be the lead role in this thing anymore, and your white counterparts are, shooting past you and doing
right.
And so it was all a bit of a shock to me. And I chronicle it all in my book, and it's a very honest book about how that reality destabilized me and put me in a mental institution. But I think the resulting years from that, being much more cognizant of my race, has been a great benefit to me. In turning myself inside out like that and surviving that, and then understanding the minutiae of British racism and British attitudes towards racism was a great development for me.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and our special guest right now, speaking to us virtually from his home in London, David Harewood. We're so grateful and fortunate to connect with this British actor and director. He starred in some amazing TV series like Homeland, Supergirl, movies like The Merchant of Venice, and Blood Diamond, one of my favorites. And I want to ask about that particular role coming up shortly, but I wanted to just see what your thoughts were as a teenager, because in 1981, something really intense happened in England. I remember seeing a Steve McQueen video called Uprising. It was a series which told the story of events from 1981. It was that New Cross, Southeast London house fire, which killed 13 young black British kids, the youngest being 14.
Children have been burnt.
We didn't feel that Britain owned that tragedy. We did not matter.
The New Cross fire became an us and them affair.
It felt, because I was born here, I'm not wanted.
The black community cannot just stand by and allow this to happen.
People started saying, we're going to have to do something. We had the power and we were able to mobilize.
It was one of the proudest moments in our lives.
This is the beginning, not the end.
Along with the events of the Black People's Day of Action, the Brixton riots, I loosely mentioned a lot of what happened at our intro with Birmingham and doing it with a twinkle in the eye and joking. But watching all of this in that documentary, it reminded me of the hotbed of violence that I heard about, the bombings that happened where I was born in Macomb, Mississippi. Acclaimed actress Anjanou Ellis, I'm sure you've heard of her. She lives there still in Macomb. But her grandfather's church was firebombed after he opened its doors to freedom riders back in the 60s. So out there in Britain, you had to have been in your tender teenage years in the 80s when all of that went down in the UK. The dynamics of racism in Britain, I'm sure that triggered some emotion then as a teenager, correct? Because all of that went down not too far from Birmingham, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes and no. Again, because our cities are so widespread, and there's not, again, there are small black communities in each individual city. So I think each city would have had it's very difficult to get a collective identity. I think in the States you have a collective black identity, whereas I'm not sure that was the case down here. So your experience growing up in Birmingham would have been very different from your experience growing up in London. Your experience in London would have been different from your experience growing up in Manchester or in Liverpool.
Interesting.
So we've all gone through each have gone through. I mean, I would say in London they're much more front-footed, much more rounded in their experience, and there is much more of a collective identity in London, I would say, than there was when I was growing up in where I was in Birmingham. There was much more assimilation in Birmingham between the races in Birmingham, whereas as there was in London, but I think there was much more of a collective identity in London, and because of those the bombings, and as Steve said in his film Uprising, the violence that happened there brought the community together, and there was a kind of a sense of a collective sense of a growing, emerging black identity, and how that was, how that would then go on to shape itself within the Labour Party in politics, and the emergence of a sort of black voice in British politics. I think around that time there was a discussion whether or not there should be a black section of the British Labour Party. That came to nothing. It's been very difficult for us to kind of carve out a separate identity here in the UK, purely again because we don't have the numbers.
Sure.
So it's been very easy for the what I call the white space in my book to dilute the power of an emerging black culture. Even with George Floyd's murder, there was a collective sense that the consciousness of the country was rising. It came to the discussion around racism and how black people were treated.
Sure.
Under no circumstances what happened to George Floyd was correct. That's why the people are out in London. It didn't happen in London, but it could happen in London.
And I went off to do my work in Canada, and I came back a year later, and all of that had gone. It had been replaced by all the language of Black Lives Matter had been weaponized. So woke was suddenly weaponized as being sort of pathetic. It was all weaponized, and all of the great ground that I felt we'd made in those weeks following George's unfortunate murder, I think there were a couple of steps taken back from that. It's very difficult in this country to really maintain focus on the treatment of black people. It's a coming back from the States where I've been for 10 years. It feels like there's still a long way to go.
Coming up, more with acclaimed British actor, author, and director David Harewood as he talks candidly about how the limited movie roles that were available to him as an actor impacted his mental state, and how he believes if he were to have suffered his severe psychotic episode in the United States versus in the UK, he'd likely end up dead. A compelling conversation you do not want to miss. I'm Eddie Robinson. I See You returns in just a moment. We're back, and you're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with British actor David Harewood. We've learned a bit more about his life growing up in England and how the realities of the world saw him and the realities of how he saw himself clashed, simply due to the color of his skin. And David, earlier in our previous segment, you spoke about the encounter that you had had with an elderly white man and how he basically told you to get your black so-and-so out of this country. And that happened to you at such a young age, at 7 years old. Could you recall for us the most racist incident that's happened in your life? Perhaps it's that moment with the old man, but tell us about the most racist thing that's ever happened to you and how it's impacted your life, even today.
I would say that is the one with the old man, because that is the one that sort of split my psyche. That's the one that sort of sat in the back of my head and made me think that I don't, and I still have that feeling. I still have that sense that maybe I don't belong here. You know, and I think there's a whole generation of black people who, yeah, we're born here, but do we feel? You know, I've been lucky enough, as I say, to spend a lot of time in the States, and I feel much more visible in the States. I feel much more of a part of a community in America.
Wow.
I feel seen. I feel like I can achieve in America. I have achieved. In my career, I've done, you know, really great things in my career, and been directing in my, you know, episodes of Supergirl in America. I don't think any of that would have happened had I stayed in the UK. I don't think, I would guarantee none of it would have happened.
Wow.
So I've been very fortunate to have spent so much time there and to have really felt like part of the community there. Even though sometimes I feel we speak the different, even though we both have the same color skin, we speak a different language because we've had a different experience. But I still feel very visible. And I feel very empowered when I'm in America.
Sure.
In a way that I'm not here.
But look at the flip side of that, because I think I heard somewhere where you've actually stated that you'd probably be dead if you lived in America. And
100%.
You experienced what you went through here over in Britain. I mean, if you would have experienced that here in the States, definitely I'm under the impression too that you'd be shot as well.
Absolutely. I'd have been shot. I had 7 policemen sitting on top of me for 2 hours, trying to restrain me when I was having my breakdown. And you can look. You only have to look on YouTube, or you know, tap in mental health. You know, black mental health, and in the States, you see guys being shot, tasered, pepper sprayed, dragged in police cars, thrown in jail. It's brutal.
As protesters continue to demand reform on racial bias in policing, a study sheds light on how people with mental illness are often involved in fatal encounters with law enforcement.
And I guess I'm very lucky that those policemen that did restrain me weren't armed, because we all know that a scared white policeman it's very easy for a scared white policeman or any policeman to be afraid of a 6-foot black man and to feel that his life is threatened and just to draw his weapon. So I think had I have been as agitated as, and you know, and I wasn't a criminal. I was just agitated mentally. You know, I was not well. I was suffering psychotic symptoms, which can be brought on by stress, which can be brought on by smoking too much marijuana, lack of sleep, combination of all 3 of those things. I found myself in a very difficult spot and was just very fortunate, as I say, that spot was not in the States. Because had I have been wandering the streets at 3 a.m. in New York and trying to get into people's houses in downtown Mississippi, I don't think I would have.
No.
I don't think I'd have made it out alive.
No, I'm telling you right now, we would not be speaking to you right now. It's I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson, speaking with actor David Harewood, who's with us on a virtual call from his home in the UK. The year 2010 saw the release of the film Blood Diamond. You know, it's been a favorite of mine that you've starred in, where you play this ruthless warlord, Captain Poison. Yeah, tell us about what it was like playing that character in the movie. I'm curious because the character sort of fits that typical acting role in Hollywood for black actors, where they tend to be drug dealers, the gangster, the criminal, the villain. What was it like playing Captain Poison in Blood Diamond?
I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed that role because it gave me that originally the character didn't really exist on the page. He was only in about 3 scenes. And when I read the script, I said to the director, this guy is a great character. You're missing a trick here. And he just laughed and thought I was making my part bigger. I just wanted to try and make my part bigger. But I said, no, I think you're missing a trick. This character's great. Yeah. So I turned up on the first day of set. I turned up like 2 weeks early. We flew out about 2 weeks early to South Africa where we filmed. And staying in the place where I was staying was a gentleman who was the film's advisor. And he was from Sierra Leone. And back in the day when the RUF, the commander I was playing, he was a RUF commander. The film's advisor was kidnapped by the real RUF and made to film everything they did. So he had all this footage of some really horrendous stuff, which he showed me and spoke to me about exactly why they were doing it and spoke to me about what they believed. And I really got into this. I really got into it. And turned up on the set, and I saw the first shot that Ed Zwick, the director, was doing, which is huge, big tracking shot through the mine, and I only had like 2 lines to cover this big shot, so I just made stuff up. The props guy gave me a real RUF manifesto, and I read some of this stuff, and I thought, I'm going to say this. So RUF is fighting for the people! RUF is fighting for Sierra Leone! and after about an hour, Ed Zwick sidles up to me and says, where are you getting all this extra dialogue from? So I'm just saying it because it sounds great, and this is from a real RUF manual, and he just said, keep going. And he filmed the whole day, and at the end of the day, he came up to me and knocked on my trailer door, and he said, about what you said about that character. I said, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So he went home that night, rewrote the whole film, and made me the de facto bad guy. And instead of being in 3 scenes, I was the bad guy of the film, kidnapping his son at the end.
RUF is fighting for the people! RUF is fighting for Sierra Leone! Any bastard Becky will joke with me, diamond, I go cut his throat.
So I guess it was a little bit me being cheeky, but also just of me seeing an opportunity, because I felt that as soon as I saw that these guys believed everything that they were doing, I felt that it was a character that had to be played.
That's great.
And played it to the max. So it was exciting for me. And one of the things at the end of the film, I remember there was a Warner Brothers executive came up to me afterwards and said, I always thought you were the bad guy, but there's a scene right at the end where you say, give me the diamond because I want to get out of here.
You think I am a devil, but only because I have lived in hell. I want to get out. You will help me.
She said, that made me realize that actually you just want to get the hell out of this hellhole as much as anybody else. Well, at least I gave the guy, it was a rounded bad guy that made them think that, yeah, he's not just bad, he just wants to get the hell out, just like everybody else.
Right. It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson with acclaimed actor David Harewood, our special guest right now, speaking to us virtually from his home in London. Your career was on the up and up. All of a sudden, it just seemed like you spiraled downward and then found yourself hospitalized and transferred to this locked ward, as you put it. You know, you were sectioned. What can communities of color do to tear down the stigmas of mental health and, you know, really make it easier for people to have these kinds of conversations?
we've just got to be honest about the stresses that are around for us. I think it's very easy to dismiss the struggles that young black men or black women have fighting their way through, dealing with a society that denies them an existence or denies them opportunities. It can be extremely frustrating because you grow up in a society where the majority of the heroes you see, I think James Baldwin said it, you grow up thinking that you're the cowboys, and then you get to a certain age and you realize, no, you're the Indians, and that sort of mental shock, jarring, as a child, you grow up thinking everything's possible, and you get to a certain age and maybe it's your mom sits you down and says, let me just, I guess in America you call it the talk, right? Where you suddenly have to speak to your child about police, about the fact that your skin color is going to make you a target, the fact that you're going to have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard. And that journey from childhood to through adolescence into manhood is extremely difficult for most people, but I think for black people it comes with added stresses and strains. And I think that we have to be honest with our children and be honest with each other about how those stresses can sometimes spill over into substance abuse, can spill over into self-loathing, can spill over into doing yourself down or lack of ambition, or it manifests itself in many, many different ways. But if you're not incredibly mentally strong, which I think you have to, I think as black people we have to be. I think we don't realize just how strong we are. But as black people we have to be doubly strong to defend against this system which is constantly telling us we don't belong, we don't fit, shouldn't be here, you don't deserve to be here. You only got here because of so-and-so. You only got here because of affirmative action. You're not really supposed to be here. Are you the janitor? Are you all these microaggressions that constantly come upon us every day? Sometimes they get the better of us, and sometimes that overload can lead to illness. And black people in this country are 4 times more likely to suffer mental illness, 10 times more likely to be sectioned. Now there's a Caribbean psychologist who did a study, and he found that black men in England and America suffer more mental ill health than black men in the Caribbean, and they suffer more mental ill health than black men in Africa.
Wow.
So there's something about transposing black people to these other countries, these other places that can destabilize us, because the framework of those places is set up as such that it can be mentally challenging. As I say, mentally, something about growing up in this urban environment where I mean, again, it's better for kids now. We have global black stars where black people can aspire. But when I was growing up, there were hardly any. So everyone on TV was white. All the policemen were white. All the heroes were white. Everybody was white. So that's when I was growing up. So you kind of woke up. You kind of grew up thinking, shit, where am I? One of the attributes I had was I would walk around town and become conscious 3 o'clock in the morning, find myself in the middle of West End and think, what the hell am I doing here? And I got to get home. And then I'd try and walk home, and then I'd black out. And the next thing I know, it'd be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be a completely different part of London. I had no idea how I'd get there. But I remember thinking, when I did sort of come to, one of the things I did was look around to see if I could see myself anywhere. One of the things I was saying when I was having a breakdown was I kept saying, I'm invisible. I'm invisible, I'm disappearing. And I remember now that I was looking for an image of myself. So I was looking at all the film posters, I couldn't see a single black face. I was looking at all the adverts. I couldn't see a single black face. I was looking at all the plays in the West End. I couldn't see a single black face on the poster. And I said to myself, well, I've just spent 3 years studying to be an actor. What the hell am I doing? I don't exist. I don't exist. Go home, turn TV on, no black people on TV. So that was, and I can remember going to one of the first times when I recovered, when I played Othello in New York.
And such a one do I profess myself, for sir, it is as sure as you are Roderigo, or either more, I would not be Iago.
Driving down Madison Avenue and seeing a picture of Michael Jordan on the side of a skyscraper. And it was the biggest image of a black man I'd ever seen in my life. And I gasped. And I thought, this is what, even though you guys probably took it for granted, but as a young black kid, I thought, look at that. That's what it means for me to be in America. To see the image of a black man on the side of a skyscraper.
Right. I remember that iconic image of Michael Jordan. I totally remember that in Times Square.
It just wouldn't happen here. You just don't get that affirmation. You don't get that confirmation. It's beginning to happen now in advertising, and there's a younger generation that are doing so well, winning Oscars. Daniel Kaluuya.
And the Oscar goes to Daniel Kaluuya.
And the Golden Globe goes to John Boyega.
Those boys are flying. But, in my generation, that just wouldn't happen. Those opportunities weren't there for my generation. So that's why it was mentally very difficult for me, because that psychic shock of realizing that the business didn't see me was just a little bit too much for me.
Coming up, we wrap up our chat with British actor David Harewood and his extraordinary account of being heavily over-medicated while in a mental institution. And as a result of that incident, he's had to address members of the Royal College of Nursing, hoping to shed more light about the hidden biases in clinical decision-making, especially when it comes to being a black male. I'm Eddie Robinson, the final segment of I See You, right after this. It's I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we've been chatting with British actor, director, and author David Harewood. His latest book is entitled Maybe I Don't Belong Here, a memoir of race, identity, breakdown, and recovery. Here on I See You, David, we've had a very open and honest discussion about your own mental health crisis and how you were sectioned at the age of 23 after an unexpected episode of psychosis. You've also spoken about being held under the Mental Health Act and how you were medicated over 4 times the recommended dose. Do you believe that race played a factor?
Absolutely.
Do you think any alternative treatments like therapy would have been better?
100%. In fact, my book has thrown a grenade into that. Oh my God. It's like upended. So I did a whole thing on Channel 4 News the other week, and my book is now being read throughout the whole mental health service.
That's awesome.
It's really drawn a light on that. And in fact, I was on a Zoom call with the Royal College of Nurses not so long ago, where speaking to a black practitioner and a fellow black patient who also had a breakdown, was medicated. And what we've learned is that is standard practice, that black men, large black men, are over-medicated purely on the basis of fear. Big black man, let's knock him out. We don't need this guy running around the ward. Let's knock him out. Wow. And they that's one of the things I'm most proud of with the book, is by being as honest as I have, it's forced people to acknowledge that. And the nurses said, yes, we are ashamed to say this is standard practice. And we now realise this is purely down to our fear of large black men. And so then now there's a whole effort to change that. There's a whole effort to make the entrance to mental health facilities a little bit more diverse, so that you're not met by a group of white police or white security or white doctors or white nurses. That you know, some of what they've also realised now is, well, that there are no senior black nurses. So, you know, the people making the decisions are nearly always white. And that has led to decisions being made that are culturally unwise. If you've got a big black guy on your ward, and you know, maybe you know, there should be some black nurses on hand just to calm the guy, talk to him, just to calm him down, give him another face to look at. Don't just send in security to restrain the man and fill him full of sedatives. You know, don't be afraid of him. You know, maybe give him some culturally specific food, which make them feel better. Maybe
that's wonderful.
You know, just so all these questions have now been, since the book has been brought out. So a lot of these discussions are now being held at the highest level, and I'm really proud of that. You know, and I'm proud that the nursing profession itself has acknowledged the problems and acknowledged the reality of over-medication. 4 times the recommended legal dose I was given. Jeez. There's no other reason other than they were scared of me. No other reason. So, yeah, that's something that has been noted and is being addressed.
And that notion that they're scared of the big black man seems to really be a component of law enforcement, which is why it's shoot first and ask questions later. I mean, it's a revelation for me, at least. In some cases, we speak of law enforcement. With me being a news anchor before I had this show, I can't tell you, David, the number of stories that I've read on the air, incidents happening right here in the city of Houston, of black men, even women, black women, mentally unstable, getting shot and killed by police and local authorities rather than dispatching a mental health officer or someone that can provide worthwhile training to those first responders when a mental health experience happens. How that makes such a huge difference in calming heated situations is so important. And you just that just really brings to mind the fear that many authorities may have as a result of not knowing what's going to happen, that unpredictability element. They just really don't know what's going to happen.
As we update you on the tragic story of a 52-year-old man from Texas fatally shot by police. Patrick Warren's family is speaking out for the first time about this.
The easiest thing, sometimes authorities use a stun gun, but at times that might not be the right weapon. You know, if that doesn't work, you know, in stabilizing them, you gotta shoot first and ask questions later. But how did you get to the other side? What really happened that made this moment, and I'm sure you mention it in your book, of finally seeing your successes and realizing that you're a human being and you can pull through this? Who are some of those players that helped you along the way?
My mother was just tremendous. You know, my mother was a great help. She was the one who, I mean, she watched me like a hawk. She would not let me get back to my profession until she felt that I was right, which took me longer than I thought because the medication was really throwing me off.
Sure.
And too much of it was depressing me. Too little would make me spin out. So my mum sort of noticed that I was having trouble. She sort of, after the second time I sort of had a breakdown, she sort of gave me half a tablet, and then, you know, with no medical experience at all, she knew me, So she gave me half a tablet for a couple of days and then a quarter of a tablet for a couple of days, and slowly just weaned me off this stuff until she thought that I was balanced. And then she let me get back to work. And so, I'm very lucky. I'm very, very fortunate. There are 15% of people who have psychotic breakdowns who never need further medication. And I just happen to fall into that 15% bracket. Some people need medication for the rest of their lives as a balance to balance out the chemicals in their brains. I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate. And also, I work in a profession where your imagination and daring and freedom and creativity is rewarded. So, I'm sure if I was a banker, I might not have got back to work. If I was in journalism, I might not have got back to work quite so quickly. But because I'm in acting, I could use the freedom that my breakdown gave me. And I do say it was a freedom and just real inhibition. Sure. Really uninhibited. It's given me the opportunity to play. I have no fear. I have zero fear. And that has helped me in my profession in that, I can put myself into characters, pull myself into characters, and that seems to have gone well for me. But it's been a long road. 30 years ago, that happened 30 years ago, but it was only really Homeland and America that really finally sort of noticed my talent. And, I haven't really looked back since. It's been a joy to spend time in the States and to grow, learning from Black Americans, and understanding a core Black identity, and absorbing that, taking that on, and taking on what I've learned in America, coming back to England and being unafraid to say it like it is, because I don't need your ass. I can go back to America and work. And so that's been very important to me and all the things I said all came true. All the things I said, look, there's going to be a generation soon that are just going to be going straight to America. And unless you guys change your ways, you're going to lose a lot of talent. And that's exactly what's happening. It's exactly what's happening.
What's the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself that's allowed you to press on and live your life accordingly?
I tell this to people that the fact that I have had 2 mental breakdowns, I've been sectioned twice, over-medicated twice, that's killed some people. There's a lot of people who died being medicated in mental institutions. And I've met relatives of people who have. I got through it. And I think what I've learned about myself and what my therapist reminds me of when I get a little bit low is how you must remind yourself how resilient you are. How resilient, how strong you are, mentally strong you are. To not only get through that, but to succeed. And he said to me, whenever you feel in a jam or whenever you feel in a tight spot, you must remember you've got this resilience toolbox in your kit bag, because you have not only succeeded as a Black actor, you've succeeded as a Black actor who's hit rock bottom, been sectioned, survived 7 policemen sitting on top of you. One of the things I remind myself is just how damn resilient I am. And if I can get through that, I can get through anything. Well, I can get through anything. So nothing really phases me anymore. And there are many challenges ahead, but I know all I have to do is put my mind to it and dig deep. I can get through that. It's just not really going to be a problem. So I just remind myself how strong I am, and I know everything's going to be okay. I'll get through it.
Resiliency is a characteristic of James Bond. We need a new James Bond now, and it's got to be someone Black. David Harewood, I am all for that vote.
Thank you. I think I'm a little too old now.
Oh, and James Bond wasn't? I mean, come on. Give me a break. All right. David Harewood, renowned actor, author, and film director, recently released a book called Maybe I Don't Belong Here, a memoir of race, identity, breakdown, and recovery. Thank you so much for being unguarded. Thank you so much for your candidness and speaking to us about your experiences with dealing and coping with mental health and raising awareness about this topic and how it impacts the Black community. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to ICU and the first episode of a two-part series focusing on mental health and its impact on Black, Indigenous, and other minority groups and people of color. As we continue to examine and support these diverse communities, ICU felt it necessary to highlight more conversations and insight pertaining to mental health services and resources that are available right here in the state of Texas. Join us next week as we connect with Black and Latinx clinicians who are changing the face of therapy. We welcome the voices of Elisa Bokeen and Ebony Harris, founders of melaninandmentalhealth.com, and Manuel Zamaripa and Jessica Lazotiani Zamaripa, both of Austin, Texas, and co-founders of the Institute of Chicana, Chicano, and X Psychology. We hope you return for part 2 of our series on mental health right here on ICU. Our team includes technical director Todd Holzlander, producer Laura Burks, editors Mark DeClaudio and Matt Bira, sound designer Dave McDermott. ICU is a production of Houston Public Media. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And for more updates and episodes, visit our website, iseeushow.org. I'm your host and executive producer, Eddie Robinson. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, I feel you, we hear you, I see you. Until next time.